Marcus nodded, his body tensing as their situation sank in. They were running out of time, and Nero's forces were getting closer with every passing second. "Let's go," Leah said, her voice filled with determination. The journey to the safe house was fraught with tension. They moved through the dark streets of Rome like shadows, careful not to draw attention to themselves. Marcus could feel the weight of the city pressing down on him, the oppressive atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Every step they took felt closer to danger, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Nero's forces were watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Leah moved with practiced ease, and her body language was calm and controlled. She had been in this situation before, running, hiding, evading capture. But Marcus could tell that the stakes were higher this time. Nero's crackdown was coming, and no one would be safe when it did. They arrived at the safe house just before dawn, the pale light of the early morning casting long shadows across the dilapidated building. It was a small, nondescript house on the city's outskirts, hidden away from prying eyes. Leah knocked 3 times on the door, and a moment later, it creaked open. Peter stood in the doorway, his expression grim. "We don't have much time," he said, stepping aside to let them in. The inside of the safe house was sparse, bare walls, a few pieces of worn furniture, and the faint smell of mildew, but it was safe, and that was all that mattered. Leah wasted no time. She moved to the center of the room, her voice calm and authoritative as she began issuing orders. "We need to start moving people out of the city," she said. "We'll use the northern routes, avoid the checkpoints. It's risky, but it's our best shot." Peter nodded, though his expression remained grim. "And what about Vitali?" he asked, his voice filled with distrust. Leah hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking to Marcus. "He's with us," she said quietly. "For now." Peter didn't argue, though Marcus could see the doubt in his eyes. As the conversation continued, Marcus found himself standing on the edge of the room, watching Leah as she took charge of the situation. She was calm, focused, and in control. But beneath the surface, Marcus could see the cracks. He could see the fear, the uncertainty. She was scared, just like he was, but she wouldn't let it show. At that moment, Marcus realized something. He didn't just care about Leah because of her strength, determination, and leadership ability. He cared about her because she was human, flawed, vulnerable, and just as terrified as he was. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the safe house, Marcus made a decision. He wasn't walking away. Not now. Not ever. Chapter 6, Flames of Betrayal. The safe house was a silent battlefield, the tension thick in the air like a storm about to break. The sun had just begun its ascent, casting long, ominous shadows across the Spartan interior. Leah Gregorio sat at a small, rickety table, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, her eyes distant. She hadn't slept. None of them had. How could they, when everything around them was on the brink of collapse? Across the room, Marcus Vitali stood by the window, staring out into the empty street. His face was unreadable, but his thoughts were anything but calm. The weight of what they were up against hung heavy between them. Nero's forces were closing in, and every second they stayed in Rome brought them closer to disaster. Leah didn't trust Marcus, not entirely, not yet. But she had no choice. He had given them valuable intel and warned them about Nero's plans. Without him, the resistance would have been blindsided. Yet the doubt lingered. He was part of the very system they were fighting against, a man of power and privilege. Could someone like that really change? Peter's words from the night before echoed in her mind, "He's a liability, Leah. If you trust him, you'll regret it." But Marcus had risked everything by warning them, hadn't he? He had put himself in danger, too. The regime wouldn't hesitate to eliminate someone like him if they thought he had betrayed them. That had to mean something. Didn't it? Leah pushed the thoughts aside as Peter entered the room. His face was lined with exhaustion. He glanced between her and Marcus, the tension between them palpable. "We've got a problem," Peter said, his voice low. Leah looked up, dread pooling in her stomach. "What is it?" Peter handed her a crumpled piece of paper. "Intel just came in. Nero's forces are sweeping through the northern districts. They've set up roadblocks. No one's getting out without going through them. The uncertainty of their situation hung in the air, a heavy shroud of dread. Marcus stiffened by the window, his jaw tightening. How did they know we were heading north? That's the question, isn't it? Peter replied, his eyes darkening. We have a mole. The word hung in the air, heavy with betrayal and fear. Leah's heart sank. A mole? It was the worst possible scenario. It meant that someone within the resistance was feeding information to Nero, sabotaging their efforts from the inside. The fear of betrayal was a tangible presence in the room, casting a shadow over their every move. Who? Leah asked, her voice shaking. Who could it be? Peter shook his head. We don't know yet. But if we don't figure it out soon, we're all dead. The urgency in his voice was palpable, a stark reminder of the peril they were in. Silence fell over the room, the enormity of the situation sinking in. Marcus turned away from the window, his face grim. We need to change plans. If the northern routes are blocked, we can't risk moving people out that way. Leah stood, pacing the room as her mind raced. We could try the southern border, but it'll be slower. And there's no guarantee we won't run into more roadblocks. Peter leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. We could split up. Send a decoy group north to draw attention away from the main group heading south. Leah's stomach churned. Splitting up meant leaving some people behind to face Nero's wrath. It was a risky move, one that could get more people killed. But they were running out of options. Do you think we'll make it in time? Marcus asked, his voice quieter now as if the weight of the situation was finally sinking in. Leah stopped pacing and met his gaze. She saw the concern in his eyes, the genuine fear that they wouldn't make it. It was the first time she had seen him so exposed, so vulnerable. I don't know, she admitted, her voice heavy with uncertainty. But we have to try. The hours ticked by slowly as the resistance scrambled to reorganize. Leah, Peter, and Marcus worked tirelessly, reviewing maps, coordinating movements, and trying to find a way out. The plan was to move most of their people south, using the decoy group to mislead Nero's forces. But there was no guarantee the plan would work. Marcus watched Leah move through the room, issuing orders and guiding her people. He couldn't help but admire her resolve, her strength. She was a natural leader, someone who inspired loyalty through her actions. And yet, he knew she carried the weight of every decision on her shoulders. Every life lost, every failure, it all rested on her. For a brief moment, Marcus wondered what his life would have been like if he had chosen a different path. If he had fought for something greater than himself instead of building an empire built on wealth and influence. But that was a distant thought, a fantasy he could never indulge in. We need to move out, Peter said, pulling Marcus from his thoughts. The decoy group is ready. You're going with them? Marcus blinked, taken aback. What? No. I'm staying with Leah. Peter's expression darkened. You're too valuable to Nero. If you stay with the main group, you'll be a liability. Marcus's jaw tightened. He knew Peter was right. He would only put Leah and the others in more danger if he stayed. But the thought of leaving her behind, of not knowing whether she would make it out alive, filled him with dread. Leah crossed the room, her gaze hard. Peter's right. You need to go with the decoy group. Marcus shook his head. No. I'm staying with you. Marcus. I'm not leaving you, Leah. Not now. Her expression softened for a moment, but only for a moment. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but firm. You need to go. We'll meet on the other side. I promise. Marcus searched her face, looking for any sign that she was lying. But all he saw was the same determination that had drawn him to her in the first place. She wasn't giving him a choice. Fine, he said, his voice tight. But if anything happens to you? I'll be fine, Leah said, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. Marcus nodded, though his heart felt heavy. He turned to Peter, his face hardening. You'd better keep her safe. Peter gave a curt nod. We will. The decoy group set off at dusk, moving quickly through the city streets, carefully avoiding patrols. Marcus stayed at the back of the group, his mind racing with thoughts of Leah. He had no way of knowing if she was safe or if she had made it out of the city. All he could do was trust that she had a plan, that she would survive. The decoy group was small, 10 people, most lower-level resistance members. They moved precisely, following a route Peter had mapped out. Their goal was to draw Nero's forces away from the leading group, allowing Leah and the others to escape through the southern routes. But as they neared the northern checkpoints, Marcus's gut told him something was wrong. The streets were too quiet. Too empty. Marcus signaled to the group to stop, his hand tightening around the gun. He scanned the buildings around them, his senses on high alert. Something wasn't right. And then, it happened. Gunfire erupted from the rooftops, bullets raining down on the group like a hailstorm. Panic spread through the resistance fighters as they scrambled for cover, but there was nowhere to hide. The decoy group had walked straight into a trap. Marcus ducked behind a crumbling wall, his heart pounding in his chest. He returned fire, but it was useless. Nero's men were everywhere, hidden in the shadows, picking off the resistance fighters individually. This is it, Marcus thought, his mind racing. We're not getting out of here. He glanced around, trying to spot any possible escape routes, but there were none. They were surrounded. And then, amid the chaos, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his heart beating when he saw the name on the screen, Leah. Marcus, her voice crackled through the line. Where are you? We're pinned down, Marcus said, his voice tight with frustration. It's a trap. Nero's men are everywhere. Leah swore under her breath. We'll send help. Hold on. There's no time, Marcus said, glancing around at the bodies of the fallen resistance fighters. We're done here. Marcus. Get out of the city, Leah, he said, his voice softening. Don't wait for me. I'm not leaving you, she said, her voice fierce. I'll be there. Just hold on. Marcus's heart ached at her words, but he knew the truth. He wasn't getting out of this. And if Leah came for him, she wouldn't either. Leah, please, Marcus said, his voice breaking. You need to go. But Leah was already gone, the line going dead. The firefight raged on, the sound of gunfire echoing through the streets as Marcus fought for his life. But it was a losing. Chapter 7, The Awakening. The silence after a firefight was always the most unnerving. It wasn't the calm that settled after the storm but a suffocating stillness, an absence of sound that made the blood in Marcus Vitali's ears roar all the louder. He lay still, his body pressed against the cold stone of the alleyway, his breath coming in shallow, measured gasps. The world around him was a blur of smoke, dust, and the acrid scent of gunpowder. He should be dead. His ears still rang from the barrage of bullets that had torn through the resistance group. They had been outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered, yet somehow, miraculously, Marcus had survived. He had watched as the others fell, one by one, their bodies crumpling to the ground in a macabre dance. The sound of their last breaths still echoed in his mind. Marcus shifted slightly, feeling the dull throb of pain in his side. He hadn't escaped unscathed. A bullet had grazed him, leaving a searing line of fire along his ribs. But it wasn't fatal. Not yet, at least. He could still move. He could still fight. Marcus slowly pushed himself onto his elbows, eyes scanning the lonely street. The ambush had been swift and brutal. Nero's men knew exactly where they would be and had set the trap perfectly. Marcus's mind raced, deciphering how it had all gone wrong. The mole. There had to be a mole. Someone within the resistance had fed Nero's forces the exact location of the decoy group. It was the only explanation. But Marcus couldn't dwell on that now. Not when every